think we've had a total of like 6 days between both units that have been vacant over the last, 6-7 months. It's been absolutely bananas. There is a ton of demand out there for the Indianapolis market in particular.
This is another episode of the Indie Investor Podcast. Got back with me by popular demand, Mr. Nick Giulioni, smartest man in the room. What's going on, Nick?
Well, I don't know about that, but definitely glad to be back.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, guys, if you didn't hear the last particular episode with Nick, we talked about how do we find deals today. It is so much different than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so make sure you guys check out that episode with Nick, how to find deals today. And we really just dig into that. But today's episode is, again, I love how Nick's brain thinks because he always keeps me on my toes, very, very creative, very detail-oriented, and we're going to just talk about, again, just the market and the shift and the pivot that we're in. How can we look at things a little bit creatively, a little bit more differently? We're going to be talking about midterm rentals today, and we're going to talk about really what is that and, how can we use that to really build wealth instead of some of the other bad investments that other people have gotten into on short-term types of rentals. We're going to talk about some other creative. I mean, I know, Nick, you actually bought a wedding venue, which is totally off the wall. So, but let's just talk about this, Nick. So number one, midterm rentals. Can you kind of just explain that a little bit about like what does that even mean at all? Because I know short-term and I know long-term rentals. I don't know midterm.
Yeah.
What is that?
Let's kind of take a moment to define each of those, because this falls right there in the middle. Short-term rentals, that's kind of renting by the night. That's when we think about it, that's like hotels, Airbnbs, VRBO, that kind of thing. On the other side is the long-term rentals that we're all familiar with, which are, renting something for a year, 2 years, 6 months, whatever that time frame is. It tends to be a little bit extended. There are very different approaches in how you go about that. A nightly rental or that short-term rental, you're going to have to go and outfit that place. You're going to have to put beds, you're going to have to put TVs, you're going to have to pay for the utilities. Whereas the long-term rentals tend to be a little bit more, it's a shell of a house. Somebody else moves in there, puts their own stuff there, pays for all the utilities themselves.
Long-term rentals, long-term rentals, it's just mailbox money. You don't have to do anything.
No. Please, nobody believe that. Trust me.
I'm just joking.
God, but that's what we aspire to. Yeah. Right there in the middle there is the midterm rental, where you do still have to outfit it. You do pay for the utilities, but it tends to be a little bit more of an extended period of time, anywhere usually from 30 to 90 days. Now, why would you want to go this direction? Well, one, it tends to be a significantly higher per night rate or per month rate than a long-term rental. A little bit lower in most cases than a short-term rental. But there's so many different areas, so many different HOAs, cities that aren't allowing actually short-term rentals. A lot of places actually have a minimum time requirement of 1 month or 3 months. And so over the last several years, we've seen just an absolute proliferation of Airbnbs. There's so much pent-up demand for travel that really anybody who decided to hang up a shingle or put up a listing on Airbnb was successful. We're starting to see that demand drop off, and a lot of these people are converting to midterm rentals, and these are doing very well. So who stays in a midterm rental? In most of the cases, these are some type of digital nomad that is moving from one place to another and is looking for a place to park for a bit. Or it's like a traveling nurse or some type of traveling profession that needs to be near a particular location for an extended period of time, more than most hotel stays would qualify for.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think people always think about these traveling types of occupations, like traveling nurse and midterm rentals. Is there anything else? Like, would this also fit into? I heard that so for example, my friend, he lives close to Indianapolis, and there's a huge storm a few months ago, and his roof literally tore off his house, and rain just bolted and poured into his home, ruining literally everything in his home. So what does that mean? He's had to move out. He has to gut his house. They can't live there. Completely renovate his house with the insurance money. So the insurance company comes in, and the insurance has to put him somewhere. So they put him into a midterm rental.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Is that a good strategy? Because he told me also that his insurance company was paying rent on this 3-bedroom house was like 4,000, 5,000 a month, maybe something like that. When typically it
Yeah.
might be like 1,600.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge way to increase that rate. Yeah, that's one natural disaster avoidance. We've had people stay in midterm rentals that we have that are between houses.
Mm-hmm.
They're selling one house, waiting for their other house to get built. They'll stay there. People that are temporarily moving to an area. Yeah, there are tons of different options that exist there, and so the way you tend to find these people is through Facebook. Actually, believe it or not, Airbnb, that you can have extended stays. And then there's another site called Furnished Finders that tends to be a really good opportunity there for people to pick up these groups. Now, I'm not sure what percentage of the listenership here is remote, but I do have a recommendation with all your investment properties. Now, this might not be a popular opinion, but I recommend having a property manager if you're going to be operating in a distance. Even if you're local, I recommend it to a lot of people in order to manage the properties. And when you think about these, you're not probably going to use your traditional long-term property manager for these things. The person that's going to charge you 8 to 12%. This is a little bit more hands-on of a management. It's also a little bit less hands-on than a short-term manager who might be charging you 20 to 30%.
Mm-hmm.
So usually that rate is going to be somewhere in the middle for one of these midterm property managers who's going to inbound these requests, who's going to qualify the requests, show the units, and rent these things out. The turnover is pretty high on these things, so
Yeah.
it is a relatively hands-on type of process. And if you're going to be remote, I highly recommend finding help.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. Totally recommend that. Few questions with that. So you mentioned before that, so short term, you have to furnish the house, get beds, decorated, everything, pay for the utilities. Long-term rentals, you don't do any of that. Tenant moves in, they move all their furniture in, they pay for all the utilities. Midterm rentals, you say that you do typically have to furnish the house. I mean, they're typically not going to furnish their own house for 30 days or 60 days typically, because that would be I've moved before and I don't want to do that every 60 days, right?
Absolutely not.
And what about utilities? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, utilities generally stay in the owner's name. I'm sure there are exceptions to this rule. In every experience I've had up to this point, what you're trying to provide is somebody's turnkey experience, a little bit more comfortable than a hotel, with a little bit more ability to do their own cooking, to have a little bit more space.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, the utilities will stay in your name. And that's one of the reasons why the rent is so much higher. Like you were saying earlier, your friend, his place would rent for 1,600 versus the 4,000. There's so many incremental expenses that aren't being passed on to the tenant directly. Like we talked about, the utilities, the internet, all that stuff. All of the depreciation on all the stuff you put in that house is going to need to be taken into account as well. Unfortunately, all that kitchen equipment is probably going to need to be turned over once a year or so, maybe a little bit less often. But all of that stuff is essentially being used and destroyed by each one of your tenants as they're using it. The couch, it doesn't have the same lifespan as a new roof or something like that. So you will have to turn those things over fairly regularly.
Yeah. Amen. So you talked about property management. So again, I want to kind of hit on that. So finding a long-term property manager, typically easy. You can find that in Indianapolis, no big deal. Short-term, that's up and coming. So obviously there's some short-term property managers that love doing that. Midterm, where do you find this property manager at? Like, do I Google a midterm property manager in Indianapolis? Like, how do I find that person?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I stumbled into mine, so I can't give you the ton of advice, but I'll tell you how I would go about it if I was thinking about it to start from scratch. First and foremost, I'd ask for referrals from my network. I'd call Brett up, see if he knows anybody I should be dealing with. I'd call up my agent, everyone within my network. That would be the first thing I would do. I would also ask my property manager for long-term rentals, for short-term rentals, if they knew anybody or if they did it. Second thing I would do after I had tapped my network is that I would probably go onto one of these furnished finder sites. I would create a profile for myself, and I would do a test of several people and say, hey, I'm interested in moving to this market for 60 days. and I would see who gave me the best response, who gave me the best client feedback, who got back to me quickly.
Mm.
That would very quickly eliminate a lot of people. And then I would ask the question, hey, I'm actually not looking to move there. Like, would you be interested in
I'm
managing?
gonna hire you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like you've got a good process here. Would love to tie into your existing system.
That's awesome. So Furnish Finders, that is kind of like a midterm rental website that
Yeah,
if you're a traveling nurse and I want to live somewhere and it's again, like it's kind of hard to find midterm rentals. I mean, it's not really listed like, oh, a 12-month lease or short term. That's what it is. So, but this is a
yep,
website that's furnished around Furnish Finders is around midterm rentals.
exactly. Yeah,
Cool. Any other
yeah.
resources just to kind of go along with that? So that's one, but any other things?
And then I would just have it on Airbnb and then also like Facebook Marketplace and things like
Mhm.
that.
That's true. Because
I would
Airbnb, I
love to
mean,
have.
I've tried Airbnb, and a lot of times, yeah, it'll be minimum 30 days. I'm like, oh man, I'm
Yeah,
trying to go on spring break here, so that's not gonna work.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's an opportunity, and as a listing, you're able to give discounts for people who stay longer, things like that, in order to drive incremental sales there during that period. Now, the one thing we didn't necessarily touch on that I actually think is really important is to have an understanding of what these people are looking for from a housing perspective. They don't want to stay in your C minus class property right across from a crack den. They definitely want to be staying in a nice, safe area. So I would say you're kind of want to be in that B or higher in order to really capitalize on the market. Additionally, a huge 3-1 probably isn't going to be what most nurses want to come stay in. They're usually traveling by themselves or with one other person. And generally speaking, you want a bathroom for every guest that's there in a furnished finder type of situation. So, a 1-1, 2-1, or 2-2, 3-2, those are going to be your better options. And then if you have an opportunity to actually split up a unit so that each bedroom had its own bathroom and then also had a lock on the individual bedrooms so that each guest could split it up but still feel safe, safe staying with a group, that would be kind of the approach that tends to do the best and yield the greatest the greatest return for you. The greatest cash flow for you is when you go into those smaller houses in nice areas.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Would a good idea be to go on again, maybe Furnish Finders, or if there's another website out there, and just look and see what is available and like what are people renting out?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Really get an idea of what's going on in your local market by trying to find one for yourself in that market. Get an idea of what has demand, what's out there, what isn't out there, and try and figure out why. And can you fit yourself in there?
Yeah. Can you just go over real one time and we'll wrap this in a bow is, again, why would someone want to do this? Okay. You got long-term rentals, which again, hopefully this is that consistent income. You don't have to worry about that much, a little bit more hands-off. You got short-term that, is a little bit, we've seen some changes with that, right? Kind of a saturated market. So why would someone do this versus either one of those real quick? Just go over the benefits.
Yeah. Tons of pros and cons. The pros that I would say here are that you're able to get significantly greater cash flow. I'll give you an N equals 1 example here, or N equals 2. I own 2 houses in Fishers. Incredible area to live, A-class area, beautiful, beautiful spot. Unfortunately, it's not just a ton of short-term demand over there. You'll occasionally get people that are willing to come in for an event or something, but not a ton of short-term demand. If I was to long-term rent these houses, they would rent out for about $2,000 a month. They're kind of older, smaller homes in Fishers. I'm doing the midterm rental strategy on both of these homes, and I'm pulling in anywhere from $3,200 to $4,000 a month. So while it is a significant investment to get these things up and running, and while I do continue to pay the utilities and all that, it tends to actually yield a significantly greater return on those units. So that's why somebody might do it. It's a headache, and if you're looking for the easy button, this is not it. It's kind of similar to Airbnb. It's not the easy button, but it is a really good way of kind of finding that middle ground and having a little bit less ups and downs that you might have in the short-term rental space.
Yeah. My question would be with this, since you're in this space, what's the vacancy like? So a lot of times my worry would be, oh, yes, I got a tenant for 60 days. Great. They move out. Now it's vacant for 60 days. What does that look like?
Yeah, so we have a fantastic property manager. I can't take any credit for finding the tenant base. So I just want to preface that a lot of it will come down to how good you or your team is. With that said, I think we've had a total of like 6 days between both units that have been vacant
Wow.
over the last 6-7 months. It's
Wow.
been absolutely bananas. There's a ton of demand out there for the Indianapolis market in particular,
Wow.
and there just aren't enough midterm homes out there at the moment.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to dig into it, guys. Guys, make sure you guys check that out. It's just a great another tool for your tool belt for strategies. And that. So, Nick, before we just wrap up this show, I don't know if we want to get into this. I know this is just a huge thing, but I think if you are just a creative mind, you think just differently outside of the box. I love that about you. And not only these midterm rentals, but you actually bought a wedding venue. So if you actually check out, I think it's called the Wilds in Bloomington.
TheWildsVenue.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
TheWildsVenue.com in Bloomington, Indiana. Amazing place, wedding venue. Now, it's not just a wedding venue. I think you've actually, hosted corporate retreats there, things like that. But just an amazing, beautiful place. But I mean, as a real estate investor, I love talking about long-term rentals, short-term rentals, midterm rentals, how to make some passive income, things like that. Now, my mind doesn't go to wedding venue, honestly. So like, that
Yeah.
sounds like, it just sounds like a lot of work. But you did some creative stuff with this. It must be maybe you're passionate about this, which is awesome, and that's a purpose for you. But like, can you guys just dive into this? There's a little bit of a creative 1031
Yeah.
exchange thing there, but like, why this investment too?
Yeah. My wife laughed at me when I said I was going to buy a wedding venue. She's basically the first thing she said was, "You were barely involved in your own wedding. What the heck are you thinking?" So I'll just tell a brief story here, and the lesson I want to teach people is that so many people focus on cash flow in the short term, and I actually think that's the wrong approach. I don't think most people should go into negative cash flow deals that cost them a ton of money and make them more tied to their jobs on a daily basis. But in today's market, if you can get cash flow neutral, I think you're generally in a good spot. And once you've built up equity over time, which does tend to happen based on the 5 wealth drivers of real estate. And just as a reminder, you've got cash flow, everyone's familiar with. You get the load and pay down, you get the appreciation, you get the tax benefits, and you get the inflation hedging. Those other four after the cash flow are really good at building that equity that you've got over time. And what I did in this particular situation, I had a hedge fund come and offer me 10% more than I thought these bunch of houses were worth. And I ended up selling them. And I did what's called a 1031 exchange. For those who aren't familiar, that's a tax exchange that occurs where you trade in a bunch of assets and you have to replace them with a similar or more amount of real estate within 180 days. Tons of rules. I'm not going to go into the particulars of the 1031, but the reason you do it is so that you don't actually have to pay capital gains on the houses that you've sold. You essentially can trade up and defer those towards a later date. What I did in this situation, I had these houses in Avon that were producing a good amount of cash flow, but not a great amount of cash flow, and sold them. Had to find something, and happened to just like go on Zillow, crank up the amount. I figured I was going to find an apartment complex. Ended up finding this wedding venue. And discovering that
like
it was
the minimum amount. Like
yes, yeah, you nailed it.
There we go.
I just had to crank it up to several $million and found it. And what I just think is incredible for all of us to understand is that I converted all of this incredible equity that I built in these homes that wasn't producing very much cash flow into an asset that is producing 5 times as much cash flow on a regular basis. Wow. I have no passion for the wedding industry, but I have a passion for building teams and building businesses. Yeah. And been able to do that down there at the Wilds. But yeah, that's kind of the story. And I just want everybody to have that in their minds, that even if they're not making a ton of cash flow on a daily basis on these properties, that equity build can be converted in the future into an apartment complex that might juice your cash flow, sure, into a self-storage facility, into a wedding venue that could significantly generate that cash flow for you. So what everyone needs to be focusing on as they're starting their journey is getting as much equity as they possibly can to live on in the future when they eventually convert that into something that's going to pay the bills on a daily basis.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome, man. Well, that's really, really exciting. It's a beautiful place, by the way. It looks like you have beautiful weddings, even though you're not crazy passionate about the wedding industry. You've done a great job, because I know you do excellence with everything that you do. Guys, this really episode is about thinking deeper and thinking just more creatively about your investments. And I just encourage you, if you don't know the answer, but you're gonna, you're thinking about, trying to find deals, or you're selling off 10 rental properties and you don't know what to do with the money, just start reaching out to me or Nick, and we'll love to maybe just connect you and just look at your different options. Because like I said, Nick didn't have to pay the taxes on that, which would have been a huge amount of money, right? And now you get, I don't know. That's just how you build wealth. So thank you, Nick, for that. Appreciate that, man.
Absolutely. Totally down to help people think creatively about whatever they've got going on in their lives.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap with the Indie Investor Podcast with Nick Giulioni. Thank you so much, Nick. God bless you, buddy. We'll see you guys soon.